If you are the leader of a volunteer organization, or if you're leading any unit where there's a lot of volunteerism, ask yourself, how can I serve? How can I nurture? How can I help people connect their inmost desires to the mission of our organization? Then they see that there's a meaning for the work they are doing. It is not to satisfy their leader, it is not to satisfy me, but they get innate fulfillment, what Dino called actualization, because their life, their time, their effort, their labors have a meaningful purpose and is connected to their idea of what living a life of fulfillment is.
Good day. Welcome to the Leader's Edge. I'm your host, Dino Santos, and today it's season 14, episode 5, with our guest, our two-time guest. It's the second time he is on our show, none other than Dilip Abayasekara, who's going to talk about how effective leaders inspire support in volunteer organizations. Dilip, could you please say something about yourself?
Certainly. Thank you, Dino, for having me on this show. I've been looking forward to it ever since Dina Loomis contacted me recently. And of course, whenever she contacts me, I count it a good start for the day. And she kindly invited me to return to the show and talk about something that I think many leaders tussle with in volunteer organizations. How do I inspire my people?
Mm.
They're not here for a paycheck, but they're here for something. And how do I best do that? That was a very appropriate question that she gave me, and it made me think deeply about my 37 years as a Toastmaster leader, many years as a church leader, and some years as a pastor, and also having been active in the YMCA and in a
Wow.
lot of organizations where volunteers do a great deal of the work.
Mm.
So that's what I'm going to focus on. How do effective leaders inspire support among volunteers in their organization?
Dilip, I'm so grateful that you are here on our show today because we have been doing a series on leadership. We've had Conrad Favorito recently talk about leaders and values required by leaders. And recently we also had someone else talk about leadership and inclusivity. So today, our viewers, I'm sure, are grateful to hear you talk about how to inspire people who are part of an organization that is all volunteer, because that takes way more skill and inspiration than most other leadership situations. Oh, for our viewers, by the way, Dilip here is also a published author. He has written several books. And for those of you watching us who are Toastmasters, you would, of course, remember Dilip as being an accredited speaker, something which is very hard to earn. And he's also a past president of Toastmasters International. The only other speaker we've had who's also an accredited speaker, I recall, is Cheryl Rausch. And so we are graced once more with somebody who has absolutely earned the right to talk about this topic. So, Dilip, lead us through. How do you inspire, people who work for a volunteer organization?
Great question. I'm going to share my screen to make sure our observers see the title slide.
Copy that.
How to inspire support in a volunteer organization. That's a huge question. Um, People talk about leading people in their organization who are employees, but we are focused on volunteers, people who are not getting paid for being there and being active. One could say, well, it depends on the organization and what the mission is. That's true. And there are pros and cons. When someone is paid, they're going to turn up. When someone is not paid, they're there on a volunteer basis. Volunteers will signal their satisfaction or dissatisfaction by their participation. And if they're dissatisfied, they will vote with their feet and they'll be gone. They don't have to be there. So there are pros and cons to this issue, whether to pay or not pay. That's really not the issue. The issue is how to connect with them and give them meaning and purpose in what they're doing. I considered some of the large volunteer organizations that there are in the world. Looked up membership numbers. Rotary International has 1.4 million.
Wow.
Lions International, 1.3 million. Kiwanis, 600,000. Toastmasters International, 350,000. Then there are many religions, churches, associations, millions of people. And therefore, one would think that those who lead volunteers really should be interested in this topic, because so much rides on how volunteers respond and how volunteers are led.
It sounds to me like you're describing a leader's ability to motivate or to inspire, because if there is no what's in it for me in terms of monetary compensation, then that means there are other benefits apart from monetary compensation that draws people. What would those be?
You are really right on the money, because I did a little research on why people volunteer.
Okay.
And I happened upon this social psychology article, and it gave results of research. This is not just off the top of the head, but what researchers are saying why people volunteer. It says it gives people a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. It gives them satisfaction that they're doing something positive in the world. Volunteers are usually happier than people who don't volunteer for anything.
Oh, that's
It
true.
it creates self-confidence. And listen to this. I also read a paragraph in this article that it shows that people who volunteer are less likely to get depressed.
Oh.
Yeah, because their focus is outward, not within, and outward doing something positive, and that they have a sense of gratitude. All these reasons. Yes.
If I may briefly interrupt, Dilip,
Yes.
to validate what you're saying, I see the same thing in folks who run animal shelters, those who manage orphanages, or even assisted living homes. Some of those people are volunteers, and I have met one who was depressed.
You haven't met one who was depressed. That's a great testimonial to the power of volunteering. Yes, giving of one's time and energy, and very often one's money for a worthy cause.
What I
So,
see is, sorry, what I also see is that they sometimes forget their problems when they're faced with somebody who has bigger issues, and so they can focus on helping that person.
Exactly.
Mm.
So the question was, well, how do leaders inspire support in a volunteer organization? So it is a question of leadership. And I remembered a story. I have used this in other contexts, but this has always inspired me. The story goes that Dwight Eisenhower,
Mm.
who was in World War II, as you know, he was the supreme commander of the Allied forces. After the war, he was being interviewed, and one reporter asked him, General, tell us about leadership. What has worked for you in leadership? He happened to be in his office. He pulled his desk drawer and took out a piece of string. And he put this string on the flat surface of the desk drawer. And he said, watch what happens. He took it from the back and pushed it, and it just kind of curled around. It didn't really go anywhere.
Yes.
He said, now watch. He took the front end of it and pulled it,
Mm.
and it straightened out, fell in line, and followed him.
Mm.
He said, good leaders make people want to follow them. Leaders know that it is not by force that they will get the best out of people,
Right.
but by attracting them to something that is meaningful
Mm.
and connecting that to them. It always struck me as, wow, this man who had the ability to give commands and people would stand in line and salute and say, yes, sir. But that was not the type of leadership he was thinking of.
Mm.
Type of leadership was that it would activate people's desire to do what the leader wanted done. I'm going to talk about two people who had a very positive impact on my life in leadership because they illustrate this.
Mm.
One is Sylvia. She was the vice president education of a club I belonged to many years ago. Sylvia was tasked with helping people achieve their educational goals in the Toastmaster Club. One day I received a call from her, and Sylvia said, Dilip, I'm calling you because I'm doing a survey. I want to find out what is it that you hope to achieve in our club this year. I was surprised. I said, Sylvia, I've been a Toastmaster for a long time. Nobody ever asked me that. She said, well, I am asking you that because I want to make sure I help you get what you want out of Toastmasters.
Mm.
So I thought for a moment and said, Sylvia, there's one thing you could really help me with. I want to achieve my DTM, Distinguished Toastmaster Award this year. And one of the things I have yet to do is to do a speechcraft. Speechcraft is given to members of the community,
Yes.
but one has to find an organization that wants it, uh, find a place to do it,
Mm.
organize all the sessions and so forth. But I said, Sylvia, I don't know where I could hold a speechcraft and where I can attract non-Toastmaster members to it. Sylvia said, well, let me think about it. I'll get back to you. And sure enough, in a couple of days, she called me and said, Dilip, I've got good news. I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and I talked to the VP of the Chamber, and he said he's sure that members would love to take Speechcraft because all of them depend upon effective communication. And there I had my opening. And because of Sylvia, we held not one, but two Speechcrafts that year. And not only did I get to coordinate one of them, but we had an opportunity for someone else also to get the credit for that because we had so many people. We had 40 people sign up for this.
Wow.
And also because there was a fee attached, we raised funds for the club. So Sylvia was aware of how to connect with people's desires and help them achieve their goals. She did
Mm.
it by asking. It's a very simple thing.
Yeah.
And Sylvia said, Dilip, I don't send forms with the survey. People ignore forms.
Yes, they do.
I pick up the phone, and if I have to call again and again and again, ultimately I get to talk with the person. Then I can really figure out what they want.
Mm. And that meant you really had to answer her call because she wouldn't stop until you did.
That's right. Now, the second example is my major mentor in Toastmasters.
Oh.
It's about Ted Wood.
Oh
He was
yeah,
a
Ted. Yeah, Ted
yes,
Wood.
you
Yes,
remember him,
I
that
remember
name.
Ted Wood. Yes.
Ted Wood became my major mentor.
Mm.
Uh, Wonderful, wonderful, inspiring effect on me. He had helped me with my speech contest. He had been a guide, a mentor, a coach. But he noticed that after I had won the second place at the World Championship of Public Speaking. I competed again
Mm.
reached the World Championship finals, but I didn't place. And he knew that I was thinking of competing again because I really wanted to win that first place award.
An
This is what
itch you had to scratch, huh?
yes. What Ted Wood did was I was at some conference. He saw me, he walked up to me. Now, Ted Wood was a man of few words. He never wasted anything.
Mm.
But he meant what he said and said what he meant.
Mm.
He looked at me and said, Dilip, I know, you know, and everyone knows you can speak well.
Okay.
But what we need are leaders.
Mm.
We need you in leadership.
Oh, okay.
He fixed his eyes on me and then he turned and left.
Mm.
Basically, he had handed me something to tussle with.
Yeah.
And I began to think, first of all, Ted Wood was someone I had a very good, trusted relationship with. So he knew that I would listen carefully to what he said,
Mm.
that I would wait.
Mm.
And also, Ted Wood had been at the highest levels of leadership in our organization. For him to say that meant something to me.
Mm.
And it worked because I decided then that I did not need any more trophies. What I needed was to make a difference for this organization that I love.
Mm.
And so the next year, instead of competing, I declared that I was running for district office. And ever since then, I've been in office, never left it. Even after I finished my presidential term of office, I've stayed on as a mentor, as a guide, as a coach, just like Ted Wood did for me.
Mm.
So you
So
see, two
so
different people and how they influenced me.
so so Dilip, you're saying that a natural progression to a good speaker's growth is to move towards leadership and not simply stay in being a speaker. In other words, if you're a good speaker, you're definitely a candidate for leadership.
Exactly. Do you
Mm.
know, you really understand that.
Yeah.
Communication is vital for leadership,
Mm.
but there are people who want leadership positions because they are fascinated by the title, but have they prepared themselves?
Mm.
And what I found was when you're a leader, you get more opportunities to speak.
Mm.
So you can continue to improve your communication skills. But having thought about how these two people influenced me,
Mm.
I came across this quote
Okay.
by Buchanan. The test of leadership. James Buchanan wrote, the test of leadership is not to put greatness into humanity, but to elicit it. For the greatness is already there.
Oh, okay.
For leaders or volunteers,
Mm.
we have to remind ourselves, I'm not going to open someone's head and pour greatness in there.
Mm.
They've already got it. How do I know that? Why? Because they have volunteered. They have stepped forward to do something meaningful.
Mm.
They are in it not just for themselves, but they're getting satisfaction in some way. And so I had to elicit that greatness out of them to do even more and do even better. What is leadership is a question that Eisenhower struggled with and answered in his life. But I love this quote by him. The leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he or she wants to do it.
Mm.
That is, if you can make someone think, oh, I want to do it, without commanding them to do it, make them think it would be good for them to do it, then you are practicing effective leadership in a volunteer organization. Here's a great example from literature. Remember Tom Sawyer, Mark Twain's one of his great novels. Tom Sawyer got his friends to paint his Aunt Polly's white fence.
Mm.
Those who remember the story will recall that here he was painting and he was wishing he didn't have to paint, but he had to do it because his aunt had told him to do it.
Yeah.
And his friends come and start watching him and say, why are you doing that?
Mm.
And he pretends that it's the greatest thing in the world. And he says, sorry, I can't talk to you. I'm just having so much fun doing this.
I do recall that book with him and Huckleberry Finn, because
You got it.
Huckleberry Finn was simply a person who, let's just say, is very pragmatic. If there was a way to get from A to B in the shortest way, he'd do it. But
Right.
Tom Sawyer could turn the most mundane into something sublime.
Perfect.
And so that's how he got those friends to paint his
That's
aunt's
right.
fence.
You
So
got it, Dina.
so you're saying, Dilip, that a leader has this ability to help his followers see a vision, to see something valuable in what they're about to do.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what Tom did with painting the fence. But look at what Ted Wood did.
Oh,
He made me think about a greater meaning for my life,
yes.
beyond trophies, beyond championships, something that would add value to life itself,
Mm.
right? That's what effective leaders do,
Mm.
especially in volunteers organizations, because people are there for a reason. We just went over some of the reasons why people are active in as volunteers.
Mm.
So we got to tap these. And
Also, if I may, we
yes,
are also leveraging what Maslow talked about in his hierarchy of needs, where people, when they get past the basic needs in their life, are drawn towards the need to actualize, and volunteering is certainly one way to do it.
right, well said. Self-actualization is at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there are reasons. So whenever someone is in a volunteer capacity, that person is responding to that inner urge in themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop here and talk a little bit. I'll just leave this slide on because it has so much relevance to what we are talking about. But I wanted to give you two examples. One example of when I failed as an effective leader in a
Mm.
volunteer situation, and another example where I succeeded, so that we understand the dynamics involved in leadership in a volunteer organization.
Mm.
Where I failed, I don't want to use actual names, so let's call this young lady Ruth.
Okay.
I was the pastor of a church, and I noticed that Ruth, who had a son active in the children's ministry, was very good at speaking to young people.
Mm.
And we had the practice in our church of every Sunday before the sermon, we would have a children's message. And one of the adults would come and give a short children's message. And usually it was tied to the message of the sermon. And very often people got more out of the children's message than the sermon because it was so simple and easy to understand. I asked her whether she would do one, and she did, and she did a great job. Then I thought, well, what a great volunteer she is. Maybe she can go a step further. So I told her about my need to have someone coordinate children's leaders so that we'd know months in advance. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I talked to her about possibly taking that on. She said, she was a little hesitant. She said, I'm not really good at talking to people and getting people to sign up for things. I said, well, just tell them what you did. You've already done it and you found that you enjoyed it, even though you were nervous. So see what you can do. And she did get me a few names slowly, and then it dried up. And I thought, well, I've got to really help her do this better. So I asked whether she would meet me in my office. I thanked her for what she'd done so far and suggested something she could do when she calls people up and ways she could handle any objections and things like that. Now, I also have a sales background, having sold many things during my college days and gone to sales schools. So I was passing some of that on to her. And she listened and said, okay, all right, I'll see what I can do. But then what happened was she stopped coming to church altogether.
Oh.
And she was also part of our leadership team, and she stopped coming to leadership meetings. And I thought, what's happened to her? I sent her messages, she would not answer. Emails, even phone messages. And after a while, I realized that she was just going to be inactive. It bothered me. I thought, wow, what did I do wrong? So that was where I had failed in my attempt to
Just out of
inspire.
curiosity, Dilip, did you ever find out why she dropped out?
No, I did not.
Oh,
She would not answer.
So
But
to this day,
I have a suspicion. I'm going to touch on that in a
yeah,
moment.
okay. All right.
Right. Now, this example of me succeeding.
Okay.
This example of me succeeding is when I was the president of a Toastmasters club, and we had all the officer positions filled. The vice president membership, who should be driving membership and arranging membership campaigns, he wasn't really doing anything. So we had monthly meetings of the executive committee, and I would ask him, let's call him Joe, not his real name, but Joe. I said, Joe, what's your report for us about how your planning for the membership campaign is coming? And he would always say, actually, well, I'm thinking about it. I haven't come up with anything yet. Now, I knew as a leader, I should not do his job for him.
Right. Yeah.
But how do I get him to move? He had no report. 1 month, second month, third month, no report. So finally, I decided I'd try something without really pushing him, but I wanted to encourage him. So I did some research and found a great way to build membership, to run a membership campaign. I printed the guideline out, gave it to him, and told him, here's something you might want to consider. See if you think that might work. He said, oh, okay. Well, behold, at the next meeting, he stands up and says, oh, Mr. President, I want to announce something. We are going to have a membership campaign. And he described the campaign exactly the way it was printed in that paper that I gave him.
Okay.
And And I was delighted. I said, wow, Mike, Joe, that's a great idea.
Mm.
Wonderful. Let's get going on that. What do you think, folks? And everyone liked it. And we ran that membership campaign. It was a great success. We ended up with, I think, 11 new members within 3 months
Wow.
of the campaign. And I gave all the kudos to Joe.
Mm.
And later I reflected that it's a good thing I stopped myself from trying to implement that campaign.
Mm.
I stopped myself, gave it over to Joe, even though Joe was out of ideas,
Mm.
but he was wise enough to say, this will work and I can do this.
So,
Again,
Dilip, it
yeah,
seems that one of the secrets that you're sharing with our viewers as well is let others take the credit.
exactly. Give all the credit to others. The
Yeah.
wise leader is very generous with giving credit
Mm.
and does not take it on himself if he can help other people shine.
Right. Yeah.
Right, right. And I was reflecting on my failure with Ruth, the young
Mm.
lady I talked about.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of what Sylvia, the vice president of education, had done with her phone call to me.
Mm.
Sylvia asked me, she didn't tell me,
Mm.
but I had told Ruth. And I didn't
Ah.
ask Ruth, is this something you'd like to do?
Mm.
I didn't ask her. I just told her, Ruth, I know you're going to be successful at this.
Mm.
Okay, so that idea of the pushing the string and pulling the string that Dwight Eisenhower talked about,
Mm.
I found that the pull
Mm.
works very well, especially in volunteer organizations.
True. True.
I'm going to go to the next slide and talk more about pushing or pulling.
Mm.
Lao Tzu, the famous Chinese philosopher, said to lead people, walk beside them.
Mm.
Very interesting. As I thought about how do leaders inspire volunteers, I think Lao Tzu was onto something true.
Mm.
Walk beside them. Don't push them, but walk beside them. When you walk beside them, what happens is you build relationships. You get
Mm.
to listen to them as partners, as peers, not as a top down approach,
Mm.
but a side by side approach.
Mm.
And when people share with you, they will reveal to you what's important to them.
So a more collegial approach.
That's right. And inside here is everyone you lead is a volunteer. Even if you have paid employees, think of them as volunteers
Mm.
because they are volunteering their hearts,
Mm.
their minds,
Mm.
their capabilities. And if they get inspired, they will do amazing things. If they are not inspired, then their hearts, their minds, their souls will not be in the work.
That's right.
You agree, Dina? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I can't help but think Chinese philosophers seem to know an awful lot of really great things. I mean,
Yes.
just look at this name, Lao Tzu. Reminds me of Sun Tzu, another great philosopher.
Uh-huh.
So
Right.
do go on,
Right.
Dilip.
And there's a reason why the Chinese civilization has been around for more than 6,000 years.
True enough.
Yeah,
Mm.
they've had many, many great thinkers.
Mm.
So, one question that we have to ask ourselves, I believe, Dino, if we want to be effective leaders in a volunteer organization, is what kind of leadership expression is going to be effective with volunteers?
Ah, okay.
When I say leadership expression, what I mean is how do you express your leadership style?
Mm.
So here are some examples of different styles. One is control and power.
Mm.
Another one is influence and inspiration. Another one is hands off,
Mm.
what is called laissez faire.
Mm.
I give you a job to do, and then I'm not going to micromanage you, and I'll just let you be.
In
See
other
what happens.
words, to delegate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just delegate. Sometimes we delegate, but we don't follow up, right?
True.
Not following up is the laissez-faire
Yeah.
attitude. And then another one is serving and
Mm.
nurturing. These are all they have different terms in the literature, leadership literature, but they are different ways that we work with volunteers.
Mm.
So, in order to understand volunteers better, I went to the heart of the Toastmasters program, which is in a club. It is in the club that a member becomes active in the program.
Mm.
So I asked myself, well, what is the mission of a Toastmasters club? How do we state it? This is how we state it. And I'm stating it not just for Toastmasters, but for people in volunteer organizations, people in leadership in volunteer organizations, because I think you will see some of the same elements in your organization. In the Toastmasters Club, we say we provide a supportive and positive learning experience in which members are empowered to develop communication and leadership skills, resulting in greater self-confidence and personal growth.
Mm.
So let's look at that. That's a lot of words there.
Yes.
Look at a few words. We provide a supportive and positive.
Mm.
Supportive and positive. That says something. If I'm going to be a leader here, I have to enhance that atmosphere which is supportive and positive. Then it says learning experience. Oh, Toastmasters is an experiential learning organization. So people need to have the experience in which members are empowered.
Mm.
What does that mean? That means I give them the tools, but trust them to do it. And
Mm.
if they fail, it's okay.
Yeah.
We help them get up and do it again.
Mm.
And when they are successful, they feel empowered that they can do it by themselves now.
Mm.
But they were not left alone. We were with them. We walked with them, but we didn't do it for them. No one can give a speech for you.
Mm.
You had to give your speech yourself. And yet you learn. As you know, we have processes called evaluations and so forth. Supportive and positive learning experience where people are empowered. Empowered for what? For what they join Toastmasters for. Most people join Toastmasters, as you know, to improve their communication and leadership skills.
Yeah.
That's what we are known for.
Mm.
So they will learn by doing to develop communication leadership skills. And what happens as a result? And
Well,
I
it
love the
says,
fact, yes, go ahead and say it, Dino. What do you see?
well, it says greater self-confidence and personal growth.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that Ralph Smedley, our founder,
Mm.
had the wisdom to say, don't just talk about people achieving their goals, talk about what happens as a result of them achieving their goals. They're going to gain greater self-confidence and personal growth.
You've got a good point there because the idea behind that is if it can happen for him, it can happen for me.
Perfect.
Mm.
Exactly, exactly. So, what leadership expression does this mission suggest?
It sounds to me a lot like nurturing as a style of leading to nurture. And it also sounds a bit about inspiring people.
Yes. Dino, you are very astute.
Oh, thank you.
It is. It is nurturing, that service slash nurture.
Mm.
It is also inspiring. It has both elements. Imagine if we didn't have a sense of nurturing and service, we would not learning experience.
Right.
But if we did not inspire them, they might not think that they were capable of
Mm.
stepping up to the lectern and delivering that speech.
Oh, yes.
And when they don't do very well, they may not pick themselves up again.
Mm.
So I think we have to have both. But primarily, I don't think we can have the Toastmasters Club functioning effectively
Mm,
unless that person, the leaders, understand that their job is to be supportive and positive and empowering.
mm.
If they are that, they will achieve that. And this is true for, I think, any activity where there are volunteers
Right.
doing the work.
And that's especially true because of the other things that you've done. You've been a pastor, or I think you still are, of your church.
Uh, Just retired.
Oh,
Yeah, just retired.
congratulations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Mm,
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Exactly. And I found I had to actually work harder at the nurturing aspects. Think of visiting the sick,
mm,
talking to the discouraged,
mm,
counseling the depressed,
mm.
right? You find that you have to pull stuff out from your heart,
Yeah.
not hammer people, but lift people.
Yes.
And the most powerful leadership tool, John Wooden, the legendary basketball coach,
Mm.
he holds the record for the greatest number of victories, championship victories for college basketball team.
Oh.
John Wooden.
Mm,
Um, he said the most powerful leadership tool you have is your own example.
mm.
You can tell me anything you want, but when you live it, then I listen. Remember, I talked about Ted Wood, how he had
Yeah.
credibility and trust with me because his own example stood out for me. A very quick story, a true story that shows this servant leadership attitude. And I read this in a textbook on leadership, where there was a plane that had been held up at an airport for a while, but the passengers were already loaded in it, and they had to wait an hour and a half on the runway.
Oh no.
Yes, it's no fun,
Yeah, it's not.
especially for a parent with a little child.
Oh yeah.
Yes. And this plane was flying across the country on a long trip, and they were
Oh.
going to have an intermediate stop in Denver, Colorado.
Mm,
But it was to load more passengers in, and there was not going to be enough time
mm,
for the passengers in the plane to leave, relax, and come back. They would have to just stay in their seats.
Oh, you
Well,
mean not even a chance to stretch their legs for a while?
right, unless they
Oh
stood up
boy.
where they were,
Yeah.
but right. And
Mm.
then a very worried parent came to one of the flight attendants and said, I hope you can help me with this problem.
Yeah.
No, we were held up for a long time,
Mm.
and now we've been flying for a while, and I've used up all the food I brought for my little child. And could you let me get out? I know you said we can't leave, but would you let me get out so that I can go get something for him? Otherwise, it's going to be a miserable time
Yeah.
for the rest of this flight.
And for the other passengers.
Oh, you are getting ahead of the story. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So how did the flight attendant handle this? She had her rules, right?
Mm,
Passengers are not allowed out.
mm.
So at first she seemed stern and she said, "Ma'am, we can't let you out." And then she cracked a smile and said, "But I can get out.
Oh, okay, there you
Tell me,
go.
what kind of food does your son want?"
Okay.
And so this flight attendant got off
Mhm.
and she got food not just for that child, but for four other children in the plane.
Oh, awesome.
And those grateful parents
Mm.
saw what service leadership is like.
Yeah.
This was not in her job description,
Mm.
but for her, her job description was satisfying and serving
Mm.
my passengers.
So she created a fantastic service experience.
That's right. And Dino, just a minute ago, you told me and also for the other passengers.
Yeah, right.
Have you ever been in a plane with a crying, screaming, unhappy child,
I
baby?
have. I have. Uh, for a 16-hour flight, that
Oh,
its
my
own
goodness.
unique version of
That's right.
torture.
That's torture, right. So consider the service that was provided here.
Mm,
So we are looking at this truth about serving volunteers, inspiring volunteers. To lift them up, you
mm.
have to bend down.
Ah,
Robert Greenleaf, who is really the father of servant leadership,
mm,
said the servant leader, and he coined the term servant leader to talk about someone who leads via service and nurturing. And he said the servant leader is servant first, is servant first.
mm,
It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve first.
mm.
There are many different types of or styles of leadership.
Yes.
One is called the high dominant,
Mm.
where person likes to command and give directions, and they get satisfaction by directing people, telling them, you need to do this, you ought to do this, get this done now. That's the dominant leader. They
That
will
would
find it's
be,
very difficult to understand.
yeah, that would be General Patton.
General pattern, exactly. Exactly. And you just started me thinking about Dwight Eisenhower again.
Yeah.
In reading some history of the Second World War, I read that the President Roosevelt, was it President Roosevelt?
Yeah, Theodore.
Uh, Franklin.
Or Frank. Okay,
Yeah,
during the
Franklin
Second World
Roosevelt, who
War.
was in the
Yeah.
Second World War,
Okay.
and Winston Churchill,
Mm.
and some of the other major leaders of the Allied nations had talked
Stalin.
about what general might lead the Allied forces
Oh, yeah.
on D-Day.
Yeah.
And they chose Dwight Eisenhower
Mm.
not because he was the most brilliant military mind,
Mm.
but because they knew that Dwight Eisenhower knew how to work with people.
That's right.
And among the generals, they were very commanding, powerful personalities, as you
True.
can imagine. So
Uh,
they chose someone who could get people to work together
yeah.
as opposed to working against each other,
Mm.
because he did not have an ego problem like some of the
Mm.
other generals had.
So you're saying that's probably why Patton and MacArthur weren't chosen.
That's right.
Mm.
That's right. And on the English side, Montgomery,
Oh, yeah.
General
Yes.
Montgomery, he also was very right. You see, so Robert Greenleaf, this had never been studied, but Robert Greenleaf studied this type of leadership. He called it
Mm.
servant leadership. So the translation is to inspire volunteer support.
Mm.
Let your heart of service to your organization and to your volunteers and commitment to the cause shine through. To inspire higher, bend to serve. To inspire higher, bend lower.
Mm.
Leave your ego behind and get satisfaction from seeing people shine for you,
Right.
for the organization, right? And so as we move on, I
Okay.
want to leave this thought with you. And the thought is, if those who are listening are leaders or volunteers, ask, how can I serve them better?
Mm.
How can I inspire them to connect their desires, their reasons for serving with the mission of this organization? And the leader who can do that is the one who will lift up that organization to a higher level, because you're lifting people up. and you say, leadership is not about me.
Mm.
It's about what I can do to help people become the best that they can be and live out the true meaning of the mission of this organization.
Dilip, if you don't mind, maybe you can stop share so that um, we can let you.
So I leave this message with you, my dear listeners. If you are the leader of a volunteer organization, or if you're leading any unit where there's a lot of volunteerism, ask yourself, how can I serve? How can I nurture? How can I help people connect their inmost desires to the mission of our organization?
Mm.
Then they see that there's a meaning for the work they are doing. It is not to satisfy their leader, it is not to satisfy me, but they get innate fulfillment, what Dino called actualization, because their life, their time, their effort, their labors have a meaningful purpose and is connected to their idea of what living a life of fulfillment is. How can I serve? How can I inspire? How can I lift? It's not about me. It's about what I can help them become and be. That is how I believe effective volunteer leaders can inspire support in a volunteer organization. And my friends, I wish you the very best in your efforts. Congratulations, you are in a position to influence people mightily.
Mm.
But it is not by the hammer, but it is by passing the baton of service.
Mm.
And that will carry them on to their own victories. And when they do, your organization will win. My best wishes to you on your journey of leadership.
What a nice message, Dilip. I have a question though. What does the future hold for you? I mean, you have occupied a lot of really great positions. You have had a chance to motivate, to plant and thoughts and ideas in so many people already. And you've retired as well from the pastorship of your church. But you seem to me like to be still a very strong person. What does the future hold for Dilip?
Dino, you're a good interviewer. You're asking a
Thank you.
very probing question. Yes, I have been thinking that myself. I have several plans. One is to write, I have a couple of books in mind that I'm going to work on. But also, since we're talking about volunteer organizations, I want to continue mentoring and guiding other Toastmasters. I have mentored many Toastmasters in the leadership path.
Mm.
And part of that mentoring is helping people see what we just talked about,
Mm.
that leadership is a wonderful opportunity to help build other people up.
Mm.
And that itself is an art. And we talked a little bit about that. We looked at these wonderful quotes about walking by the side of the person
Mm.
that you want to lead, about nurturing and serving. And the value system of Toastmasters, the core values, as you know, are there's integrity, meaning be honest and ethical, and there's respect people, and next there's serve.
Mm.
Service is right in there in the
Mm.
core values, and the last one is excellence. And when we do all these things with excellence, we'll find that we have been an effective leader
Mm.
because leaders serve.
So I can see that uh, your career, though it's already reached the peak of its journey, is still very much active. In other words, you're still a shaper of leaders, a shaper of men. Um,
Yeah.
I was just wondering, Because in today's world, ever since the pandemic happened and things are going online, remote, hybrid, and all that, are there special challenges leaders who lead volunteer organizations face when, for the most part, there are times when you have to lead remotely? For you, what has been your experience? I'm sure you've had to give some sermons, for example, online uh,
Yes,
instead of live. So,
right.
how did you overcome that? You know,
This is where communication becomes extremely important.
yeah.
You asked about, not being able to be with people due to the
Yes.
COVID pandemic.
Mm,
And I was thrust into this, and I found that I had to, in order to still continue my ministry,
mm,
still preach and then have it broadcast,
yes.
not have people in the church, but people would listen, would watch the
Yeah.
broadcast of my sermon.
Mm.
But I would be preaching to an empty sanctuary,
Yeah. Yes.
right? So I had to imagine that there were people in those seats, and I
Mm.
actually looked at different parts of the church as I preached.
As if they're there. Yeah.
Right. Then I had to again work at creating a sense of spiritual growth for my
Mm.
church.
Mm.
And so I started Zoom Bible studies.
Awesome.
Yeah, people would join me in by Zoom, and we it was so successful that after the pandemic was over, we continued
Mm.
until I retired. That Zoom Bible study continued.
So I can only imagine, Dilip, that having been such a good motivator for so many years, you had also managed to adjust in motivating yourself in spite of the fact that you were speaking to an empty room. Not everybody realizes that immediately, but because of your maturity and your experiences, you just naturally understood that you had to bring your game higher now that you're doing things remotely.
Exactly.
Question: how did that affect collections?
Yes, we it did affect collections
Mm.
because we didn't collect money when people were not coming to
Yeah.
church, and we had not set up a system where people could send their tithes online.
Mm.
It happened so fast that it caught the church unawares.
Mm.
But I saw my job was to maintain community
Mm. Mm.
because people need that sense of connectedness, especially when they are told not to meet in person.
Mm.
And people get lonely,
Yeah.
discouraged, depressed. So here's another thing that we did. Some of the leaders and I would go around to people who were shut in their homes, but we would take uh, placards,
Mm.
notice boards, and put signs on them like "We love you," "We miss you,"
Oh,
"Stay
wow.
strong," and we would hold them outside the windows and
Okay.
wave at them.
Mm.
Okay.
I also imagine that that brought out some skill sets in you that were already existing but were magnified even more. Things like
Exactly.
counseling skills,
Yeah.
instead of public speaking, one-on-one speaking. Um, I am sure you had to be at several wakes from all the people who passed away from COVID, and that brought out even more of your leadership and communication skills because bringing comfort to the bereaved is a special skill.
Right. It is a special skill. And what I found out was one of the greatest things a pastor can do to people
Mm.
who are in sorrow is just to be there.
Right.
Don't speak a lot. Have both ears open and your one mouth closed most of the time, but
Mm.
listen and
I,
let people know you are there for them.
I like to think about how God created us. He
Right.
gave us two ears and one
Right.
mouth. And
Right.
that must have meant he wanted us to listen twice as much.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So that is servant leadership, isn't it?
Yes, it
Serving,
is.
nurturing, lifting people up, not yourself,
Mm.
but lifting others up and letting people know that they matter, that
Yeah.
they are of value.
Yes.
Not for what they can do for the organization, but just because inherently they have a value
Mm.
that can never be devalued. When people understand that, you will win their trust and you will find that they will go over and beyond
Mm.
to serve the cause that you are in with them for.
Thank you also for sharing with us that anecdote, that story about Eisenhower and the string. There's only one other person I ever met and heard who used a string to prove a point. That was Admiral Grace Hopper when she talked about COBOL. And I had a chance to engage her in personal conversation when I attended that convention in Washington, D.C. This
Wonderful.
string can be a simple device to
That's right.
explain a wonderful principle.
That's right.
Hmm. So,
But
yeah, go ahead, Dilip.
no, Daniel, there are some phone calls coming for me, so I will have to
Okay.
get off soon.
All right.
But I
So,
want to thank you.
yeah,
Thank you for being, as always, a great interviewer, a good listener, and you also have that sense of service and nurturing. The way you answer, the way you respond, and the way you talk about others all shows.
yeah. Thank you so much, Dilip. I was once a worship leader in our church,
Okay,
a job that I volunteered for. Yeah. Uh, we
fantastic.
we had a great pastor, David Yon, who, like you, planted a thought in my mind and got me to volunteer.
I'm glad you did. Right.
So, ladies and gentlemen, now that we've heard Dilip share all of the wonderful insights that he has gained from decades of leadership, please do leave notes in the comments section about your takeout or take home from what you've just heard. And if you liked it, it doesn't take much to click like, share, and subscribe. And I'd like to remind everyone that coming up in episode 6 is another second time guest to this show. That's Coach MJ Tolan, who will talk about adversity mastery. So, ladies and gentlemen, as ever, me, myself, and of course, Dilip here, believe that learning is a never ending journey with limitless vistas. Good day.